Hello. How you doing? Are you well? Nice to see you. How you getting on? We're going to do the Prelude today, which is a tricky one by William Wordsworth. I'll take my time going through this one, but I will try to go through it as quickly as possible. I realise the last video was quite a bit long there. Right, so first thing you need to know with this one, it's called the Prelude. Pre means before, so it's supposed to come before something else, and it is an extract from a huge poem. It's like 400 pages plus. So it's a huge, what you call an epic poem. It's what we would describe as his magnum opus. So like the biggest thing that he created, his life's work. The thing that William Wordsworth here, this handsome chap here who seems to have a headache, having a tough time of it there. His biggest piece of work, the work that he worked on for his whole life. This is not a biographical poem. And it explores William Wordsworth's life, particularly the Prelude, his young life actually. It was called, this poem, when he was working on it, he was calling it The Growth of a Poet's Mind. That was an alternative title for it when it was released in 1850. It was released in the same year that he died, so it's what you call posthumously published, meaning after he died. So we didn't actually get to see this one published in his lifetime. It was published in 1850, about 3 months after he died. It was given the title, The Prelude, or Growth of a Poet's Mind. But when he was working on it, because William Wordsworth here, this guy, was really good friends with this guy called Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And when he was working on it, he called it the poem to Coleridge, because these two guys were friendly rivals, really good friends, and they were both what you call romantic poets. They founded, with their lyrical ballads, book of poetry, a movement called Romanticism, essentially. And Romanticism, as you can see by this beautiful picture here, this is a piece of art by a German artist, was obsessed with nature and the environment, and particularly the power of nature. So Romanticism was kind of a reaction to what was going on in the world, in Britain at that time in particular, the Industrial Revolution. So the rise of the machine essentially was going on. You can see some child labour going on here. And poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge were much more interested in getting back to nature and very much rejecting what was coming with the Industrial Revolution. They were also quite pro-French Revolution, which was also happening at this time. So a lot of their ideas had to do with politics and the individual. This poem deals with quite a lot of individualism as well. So Wordsworth, this guy here, was from a place called the easiest way for us to think about it is the Lake District. I won't go into the details of where exactly he was from in Cumbria, but he was born in the Lake District. He then moved down to the south to go to university. He had a very troubled childhood. He spent some time living with an uncle and a grandparent that he didn't get on with, so he spent a lot of time out here in the country, taking in nature, going on long walks. No TV, no Netflix, any of that kind of carry on. He had to get out of the house and spend a lot of time walking around these beautiful surroundings. He's buried actually in Grasmere in the Lake District. And this poem is all about, essentially, him joyriding across a lake in the middle of the night on one of these rowing boats. You can still rent these from the Lake District if you go down there. This is a recent photograph taken. So he took one of these rowboats out in the middle of the night and he started rowing across the lake. And the further he got out onto the lake, the more he could see huge mountains behind him looming over him in the moonlight. And he had a little bit of a freak out So he goes crazy out here, and then he thinks, right, I'm going to run home. So he goes back because he feels like this mountain was almost following him. And then when he gets back, he goes home, and he can't escape the image of this mountain, the power of nature chasing him for the next couple of days. The poem was written as a prelude before a poem that he wanted to write called The Recluse. And in The Recluse, he was going to discover what it was to be a man, what it was to be alive, to explore the meaning of life, essentially. It was supposed to be his huge epic poem that he was going to leave behind after his death. Unfortunately, he never got to finish it, so it was going to be a three-parter. This poem, The Prelude, is only one of those parts of that huge epic poem. Okay, so the poem has got a bit of a cyclical structure, the whole thing. The 400-page poem, the massive big epic one, and in it he starts off here in Cumbria, in the Lake District there, as a boy. He goes away to university, he becomes a man, he tours around France, and then eventually in, I think it's 1799 or something like that, in around 1800, in around 18, he returns back to Cumbria, where he settles in Grasmere. So it kind of follows a cyclical structure. We're only doing one tiny little part of it, and that's where he's a child, and he's on the moors of Grasmere there, and he's running around having a great time, and he steals this boat. The poem's got a couple of major themes. One is man versus nature. In this poem, he gets a little bit freaked out by the power of nature, and he's almost in conflict with it. He's almost fighting it, definitely. He's fearful of it. And also with the self. So he's in conflict with himself. He's a little bit of a rebel in this poem. This is a big deal, stealing a boat here. So he does explore some ideas about morality. But I think more it's self versus self, this poem, where he can't really decide if it was in his mind, what he should do moving forward. This is what we would describe as a Bildungsroman, which is a German word, and it's a coming of age story. So any story, any narrative, any poem even, where we see the movement from child into adult, we tend to give it that type of Bildungsroman. The poem itself, very simple in terms of narrative and what happens. Not a lot happens. That's the events there I've discussed. But it deals with big ideas. Very exploratory, just like the Romantics would be, okay? They dealt with big, huge, massive ideas. Nature, man, the meaning of life, religion, politics, all of those things, huge, big ideas. That's what they dealt with. Okay, I think I've mentioned everything there. One thing I've missed out is that it comes from a section called Childhood and School Time. It's broken up into, I think, 14 books. It was published posthumously. And the subtitle there is Growth of a Poet's Mind. So it's all about him growing up, becoming the poet that he was in his later life. Okay. You can see I've already done the context in green. I'll do do the ideas in blue, and I'll do the language, structure and form, anything along those lines, in red. Okay, I'll read through the poem one time, as we've done before. I think it's quite helpful. It is an autobiographical poem, so you can actually get away with, usually I ask you to talk about the speaker, but you will actually get away with saying Wordsworth here, because the poem is from his narrative perspective, so it is his point of view. It's his point of view. He is telling us what happened to him. So it is very much an autobiographical, and it is a narrative poem. It is in, this is one continuous structure here, but it's in what you call iambic pentameter, meaning essentially one summer evening led by her I found. So we should have 10 syllables per line. All right, that's important because it's quite impressive. So he has to limit the amount of syllables he has. It's what you call blank verse. Okay, we call it blank verse because it doesn't have a rhyme. In doesn't rhyme with stealth, doesn't rhyme with voice, doesn't rhyme with on, doesn't rhyme with side. You can have iambic pentameter that rhymes, which is a little bit more difficult again. Right. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky quay of its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain and stepping in pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my heart move on. So this is where he steals the boat. And he starts to move through the mountains. So the boat moves on, leaving behind her still, on either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rows, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, so he notices the mountain here. The horizon's utmost boundary, far above, was nothing but stars, and the grey sky, she was an elfin pinnace. Lustily, I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When, from behind that craggy steep, till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, this is where he starts to have a little bit of a freak out. A huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power, instinct, upreared its head. So it's got some personification here, we'll come back to that. It's almost like the mountain is after him. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up above me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with a purpose of its own, and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. So he totally freaks out. He thinks that the mountain's coming after him, like some sort of living thing. And he runs away. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. There, in her mooring place, I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. Okay, so he escapes. It's all in his head now, remember. The mountain is not after him, of course, but he feels like it is. And remember, it would have been very dark as well. But he goes home in a serious mood. And after he had seen this spectacle, for many days, my brain worked in a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes. So there's a little bit of a break here. This is later, a couple of days later. It worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being over my thoughts. There hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar faces remained, no pleasant images of trees or sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, move slowly through the mind by day, and were a trouble to my dreams. So he starts to have nightmares. Now remember, he's only a little boy. He steals this boat. It has a huge impact on him, and the power of nature is imprinted on his memory forever. Right, let's have a crack. So one summer evening, led by her, is the most important line from this first little bit. He personifies nature itself as a she. It's almost like Mother Nature here. Led by her. So this is his childish rebellion. He's almost led to this boat, and he finds a little boat tied to a willow tree. So it's happenstance. So this is it's a little bit of a crime he's committing here. But it's not deliberate, it's not pre-planned, is it? He sees this, it's opportunistic. So he is very much a little bit hedonistic here is a good way to describe him. Yeah, he's doing this for fun, for pleasure. So he finds a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cave, its usual home. So again, he extends that personification. This boat is almost alive because it lives. As in, it's almost like it's got its own habitat. It lives in this cave, within its rocky cave. You can do a little bit of analysis if you want. You can talk about rocky having connotations of danger. You can have the willow here. I do draw a little willow tree here. We know that willows, they kind of hang down like that. So if this is our willow tree, you've got your hanging down of foliage, which provides a good cover. So if the boat was in here, then we know, oh, this is our water here. So our boat's in there, it's hidden in the willow tree in a little cave, and that hiding is going to become quite important later on. So this is it's a crime of stealth here. He's very much trying to get away with something because he can. So straight away I unloosed her chain and stepped in and pushed it from the shore. This happens very quickly. So I would be saying something here about the pace. You can do that with straight. He means straight away here. There are limitations obviously to the iambic pentameter, but this is archaic. Straight, I unloosed her chain and stepped in. So it continues the personification of the boat. Here is the boat. So I unloosed her chain. It's almost like he's setting it free. Right, now, a little bit of context here. Essentially what he's doing is trespassing, really. And this is, I don't know, in the modern context this would be joyriding, I suppose. Stealing somebody's transport and taking it out for a spin. Doesn't seem that harmful because he's not wasting any fuel or anything like that, I suppose. But he is taking something that's not his. So if you want, you could talk about the French Revolution here and his revolutionary or his rebellious childish ideals. He does say that it was an act of stealth. So this is secret. We've got the connotations here with stealth, to be hidden. And troubled pleasure, this is a nice line here. This is an oxymoron. So it's oxymoronic because we don't usually associate trouble and pleasure. So the idea being that this guy is very much a rebel. So he's troubled. He enjoys it because he's committing a crime. Nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on. Right, so a little bit of context here. These mountain echoes that he's talking about when he's rowing. So he rows, and because essentially what we've got is we've got mountains on this side, we've got the lake here. As he is rowing through the lake, the sound of his rowing echoes back and forth across these mountains, so he can hear himself moving in the silence. So it was silent before, now he can hear himself echoing as the boat moves on. So basically he can hear himself, so he's trying to be stealthy, but he's the only person in the valley causing any noise there. My boat moved on, leaving behind her still on either side. So everything else remains still. But he is creating a little bit of context for you what a sailor would call wash. So that's where A boat moves through, we've got some water here, and a boat moves along this, creates waves on either side, this spread out. Excuse my bad drawings, hopefully you get the idea. On either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon. So this is what's happening. Small circles, glitter. Idly is our adverb here in the moon. Here's what's happening. So as he's moving through the water, he's rowing. These small circles, if you skip the stone across a lake, you know that it would leave little ripples. So these ripples are glittering idly in the moon. The only thing in the sky is the moon. So that provides his only source of light. And when that shines down onto the lake, he can see the ripples. So that's the only source of light that he has. Small circles glitter idly in the moon. The adverb idly here. Sounds very relaxed, doesn't it? No panic yet. That's quite important because later on there's going to be a contrast. It's all lovely. It's all I don't know, summer's evening. He's out for a little gentle row in the lake. And the tone at this moment is very, very relaxed. You can tell that they all melted into one track. So it's all calm, all very clean, all very fun at this point. Until they all melted into one track of sparkling light. So we've got this description of what essentially is this landscape that he's describing is very enjoyable. A sparkling light which melts into one track. But now, like one who rows, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point, an unusual simile here. It's almost like he compares to himself. Like one who rows, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point, with an unswerving line, I fix my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge. So now, this is our temporal, referring right to the moment. So the plot is moving on, becomes a little bit more of a narrative. He's stolen the boat, he's out on the lake, he's causing ripples across the lake, and he has reached where he set out to get to. His chosen point is what he describes it as. So he's reached his aim. That's where he set out to get to. He thought, here's the lake, that's the point I'd like to get to. I'm going to row to there. He gets to there and he thinks, oh, very good, I'm pleased with myself. Maybe I could row back now. So he reaches that point. He describes his progress as unswerving, an unswerving line. A swerve would be to go in and out like this. So he has moved in a very straight line. Okay, so maybe just to describe that there, we'd say he's kind of gone as a crow flies. So in a straight line. And when he's moved in that straight line, he fixes his view upon the summit of a craggy ridge. Just to go back to these rowing boats here, you can see them there. So you'll be sitting in this rowing boat like this. You'll be sitting there in the boat. Now, this is how the boat would move forward. So it has to go this way for the bow to cut through the water. But you, sitting in the boat, would have to be facing that way. Okay, so you're facing the opposite direction of your travel. And that's quite important because he has to change where he's looking. So he looks back for the first time. That can be your AO1 really. But to fix is your verb. So I fixed my view to look upon the summit of a craggy ridge. So this is the top of the mountain. So he looks at the top of the mountain and he describes it as the horizon's utmost boundary. Here there's a little bit of a personification of the horizon because this is possessive. The horizon's utmost boundary. So like this is the limit of the earth, the sky, where the earth meets the sky, the utmost boundary. Now you got to remember a little bit of context. we are talking about the 1800s here. We're talking about not too much of an awareness of space, limited awareness of science. This was increasing all of the time, but any kind of nature that's described with the sky here has always got connotations of God or celestial life. The idea that heaven is up there. So this utmost boundary far above was nothing but stars and grey sky. So he sees the stars above, he sees the grey sky above, and he feels a little bit maybe alone. He says there is nothing. So he's totally isolated. And he's absolutely in love with nature at this point. Now remember, Wordsworth was a romantic poet. So he's obsessed with nature, he loves nature, and he cannot get enough of this beautiful scene that he sees. He describes the mountain itself as an elfin pinnace. So elfin, that's your adjective there. It means like an elf. So we're talking about magical, for example. An elfin pinnace. Pinnace, just to give you the detail, that just means peak. So this bit of the mountain, like the very top, that bit there. Some bad mountains. Let's try again. Tolerate a bad mountain, but that one's terrible. So the pinnace would be this bit here, the very top. Think about pinnacle. Pinnacle comes from that word. And then lustily he dips his oars into the silent lake, and as he rises upon his stroke, the boat goes heaving through. This is a really interesting choice of an adverb. People like to analyse this one in particular. So the adverb lustily has got connotations of his sexuality here. It's almost like he's in love with nature itself. She was an elfin pinnace, so the idea of Mother Nature, who he is in love with, he has lust for. So he's enjoying himself, and he lustily dips his oars into the silent lake. So very many people talk about this being euphemistic, sexually euphemistic. I dip my oars into the silent lake. So this is again his idea of rebellion, of transgression. He knows he shouldn't be here, and he's really enjoying the fact that it's just him and nature alone together. And as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. So let's talk about the word choices. He says, I rose up upon the stroke, and my boat went heaving through the water. And then like a swan. We know this one's very simple because we've got the simile. So like a swan, I don't know, graceful, shall we say, might be a good connotation there. But he rises up. So maybe growing in confidence. His strokes here, that can be his rowing. And he's going heaving. So he's expending energy. He's probably breathing quite heavily, I'd imagine here. Like a swan, when from behind that craggy steep. Now this is the key moment of the poem, I would say. This is where everything changes. When from behind that craggy steep till then, the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge. So this is where he gets freaked out. He starts to really worry here. This is the time where he sees the mountain come to life. When from behind that craggy steep, and this continues on, this is heavy and jam, the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge. This is a parenthetic clause here. A huge peak. And he describes the peak twice as huge. So you get the repetition of huge. Essentially, he sees the mountain. Behind the mountain, there's another big mountain. So what he's seeing is he's moving further and further away from the shoreline. And he saw this mountain here, and he thought that this peak was the biggest one. But the further he gets out, the more he realizes that actually there's another one, a secondary peak, which is even bigger, and it really worries him. It's too big, it's too powerful, too immense. So he starts to panic a little bit, as you can see from his repetition of the word huge, which in itself is not an especially, I don't know, erudite word choice, would you say? But I think that maybe suggests a little bit about his shock. He's unable to describe it. And then, as if with voluntary power, instinct reared its head. So he reacts here. This is his fight or flight. So a little bit of adrenaline is released. He freaks out. He sees what he thinks is a threat. Use your biology there, what you know there. And instinct takes over. You want to talk a little bit about evolutionary science? And Darwin there, be my guest. Very nice little bit of context if you want to use that. The idea that it's genetic, it's built into us. He turns into an animal almost here and reacts as an animal would with instinct. Instinct rears its head, so he personifies instinct. He personifies the fight or flight notion. And he panics, and here's what he does. He uses the verb struck and he repeats that verb. He struck and struck again. So this shows his panic. This is him rowing. First of all, trying to get away. And it seems to be growing. So the mountain is growing still in stature, and it's a grim shape. Firstly, let's talk about how it seems to be a threat. It's grim, so it's kind of like a monster. And it seems to be growing. The use of the gerund verb growing here seems to imply that it's getting bigger all the time. And it towered up between me and the stars. So to tower implies superiority. So this is where he's in battle with nature. Towered up between me and the stars. I like this line. So the idea that it's some sort of barrier, maybe to his dreams. So he is stuck, essentially. He can't get away from this beast, he thinks. And still, for so it seemed, with a purpose of its own, and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. So this section here makes it seem like he is being pursued. So he's being chased. It seemed with a purpose of its own. So there's a suggestion here, purpose of its own, that it's malicious. And this seems to be the first encounter that he has with the power of nature as dangerous. To him, up until this point, nature had been for him a thing of beauty. And this seems to be the first encounter where he sees that nature itself can be dangerous. So it's all about the power. Coming back to that P&C focus. And measured motion like a living thing. Now this is where it sounds particularly human. Measured motion. You can talk about the alliteration there. Alliteration bores me. I think you're better off talking about the adjective here, measured, to describe the motion it has. It's making it sound like it's making decisions. It's not just reacting as the human does with voluntary instinct. But the mountain itself is a lot more calm. It moves carefully with measured motion after him, like a living thing. You can obviously do the simile there if you want, like a living thing. and it strode after him. Even the choice of the verb here, strode, has connotations of confidence and assurance. It's coming after him. It knows that it will defeat him if it catches up with him. His reaction will be all of our reactions at this point. So with trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. Right, so here's what he does. At this section he turns around and he runs. Like the big coward that he is. No, he's only a cub. Leave him alone. Don't bully him. Anyway, with trembling oars, this is your run verb here, trembling oars, I turned, and through the silent waters stole my way. So he turns around. How did I do that? That's cool. And through the silent waters stole my way. So he describes the water now as silent. Remember, he is completely on his own. He repeats the idea of stealing. This time it's a little bit different. The kind of theft that he wants, because he's trying to steal himself to safety. Doesn't look like an F, does it? There we go. So he's trying to steal to safety. This is a different use of the verb. To steal, first of all, he actually literally steals. To steal the second time can mean to run to, or to get away from. Back to the covert. Nice use of this adjective here. Covert of the willow tree. That means safety here. Or the, shall we say, base is hideaway of the willow tree. I'm not going to draw another willow tree, you know what I'm talking about there. So the willow tree, which very much provides shelter. There in our mooring place I left my bark. He returns the boat now. He starts to call it bark, so it comes back to being wood again. It's no longer personified really, as it was here. I left her in her mooring place. I left my bark. So he leaves the wood, his rowing boat. Get away. And through the meadows homeward went in grave and serious mood. Right, so he's had a total freak out here. In grave and serious mood. He did not enjoy that experience. And look how much the pace has changed. So it speeds up as he panics. And then, at this point onwards, the pace slows again. Because he is thinking about what has happened. So from this point here, right to the end of the poem, this is now him thinking about what went on. So he's had his transgression. This is now him in reflective, thoughtful, philosophical mode. And those are all very much romantic ideas. They would have liked to spend some time thinking about what this meant. What could this possibly mean, this mountain that chased after him? And through the meadow homeward went in grave and serious mood. So grave, you got your adjective. You got another one there with serious. You can talk about those as a synthetic pair if you like. You want to be fancy, we might guess. But after I had seen that spectacle for many days, my brain worked on a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes. After there, so it's later. We know that time has passed. That's temporal. Do what you like there. That spectacle, he describes it as a spectacle. He uses the epithet that as well. So he can't describe it. He's not able to describe it. He can't. And for many days my brain worked. My brain, possessive. With a dim and undetermined. And look at his use of adjectives again to describe. It's dim and undetermined. So these are good connotations here of what he's saying is that he's unsure, overworked, or confused is the main one. He is dim and dull and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. So it shook him to his very core. His belief system has been shaken. Now, some critics might say here, they might go for this and say, well, he wrote this as an adult looking back. This is retrospective. So maybe he is talking about his religious belief here, or his political beliefs. To give you a little bit on that, so he was very, very much pro French Revolution, and then later in his life, because of the violence he saw all across Europe, he became less sure about his belief in that kind of revolution. So he says, there hung a darkness, the verb there, to hang. Some call it solitude. So he's experiencing some maybe temporary depression here. He can't get himself out of this low mood because of what he has seen. Some call it solitude. That's really a little bit of context for you. It would have been a very taboo subject back in those days. It's not necessarily saying that he's feeling particularly depressed about it, but he's just down. He's feeling low. He can't really understand what's happened to him. He can't rationalise it. That's a good word. Let's say he can't rationalise. No, he can't rationalise it. There's no rationalising what has happened. Some call it solitude or blank desertion. So it's like his mind has gone blank. He's been deserted, so he's alone. No familiar shapes remain, no pleasant images of trees. So nature, to him now, is no longer, it's gone from being a nice, benign, delightful, pleasant presence to going to being dark and dangerous. And it's the first time he's experienced it, and he did not like it at all. No pleasant images of trees, no colours, or sky, or sea. This is all listing. So the sea has let him down, the sky, he doesn't like see colours or green fields, images of trees. All of the things he misses. Instead, they've been replaced with huge, he repeats that again, dark and huge, remember, and mighty forms. So this is now to do with the power of nature. The darkness that he says, that do not live like living men. This is your simile. So he's talking about here the distinction. So man and nature, for the first time in his life, he's noticing that they are completely different. The huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through the mind by death. The mind here, that's his mind, and were a trouble to my dreams. So here is his possessive. Poor old Will is having some nightmares. Poor guy. Horrible nightmares at night, where he is probably reliving this nightmare and trying to understand. And essentially, what it comes down to is this Bildungsroman, this moment of stealing this boat, meant that this is a structural feature, meant that he, for the first time, appreciates the power of nature. And it leaves him confused and uncomprehending. Okay. Easy job. Right, well done. Thanks, guys. That one's a tricky one. I think that's one of the older poems in the anthology, and a difficult one to understand, even though the actual narration itself is simplistic. Not a lot happens, but there's a lot of complexity in the ambiguity here. One of the key things to remember is you can read this as an allegory. Okay, so lots of different critics seem to think that this might mean something else. It's all about his life. But was he talking about something else? Now remember, this was written, we're talking about it was actually finished in 1805, wasn't published until 1850. But in 1805, there's loads of things that you couldn't talk about, particularly certain philosophies, politics, ideas about religion. Romanticism itself was very much controversial when it first came out. So very many critics think that he's talking about other things here. So have a little think about some of the big ideas that he might be talking about. Apologies for the state of my willow tree there. I did my very best. Okay, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a million. Good luck.